I believe there are two kinds of people in this world. People who do things and people who talk about people who do things. But I may be wrong. Hi, my name is Caroline May Woodson, and you are listening to my podcast, I May Be Wrong, But. So I believe there are two kinds of people in the world. There are people who do things, and there are people who talk about people who do things. And that is how I opened up my graduation speech. I gave the commencement speech at my college graduation. And basically, I went on to talk about how there are two genres of people in the world. People who do things and people who talk about people who do things. And I gave the reference of the messenger characters in Shakespeare, right? They run on out of breath and they've just seen this crazy thing happen. And they tell you all about it, but we never learn anything about the messenger. Right? We don't know if the messenger has 16 kids who all of their names start with the letter A. We don't know if the messenger makes really good lasagna. We don't know anything about the messenger. All we know is that that person spends their whole life, their whole purpose is talking about other people and relaying what's going on in other people's lives rather than living. And of course, the messenger is a necessary evil, but I was basically saying that you're here today because you're doers. You did something, you graduated, you got a degree. But I think that applies to everything in life. But the reason why I share that story, my grandpa couldn't attend. He got there shortly after I gave the speech. He came to my other ceremonies. I had a few that weekend. And I showed him the video of me giving the speech. And he said to me, he was like, "Oh, you point your finger just the same way your grandmother used to point her finger," which is really sweet. I love to be compared to my grandmother. I think it's one of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten in any scenario. But I wanted to start off with that story because I think it talks about tradition and the lives that we live as they feed into one another. So our main source from today that we're going to be talking about, our main quote of the day is, "In all the lives we ever lived and all the lives to be are full of trees and changing leaves." It's by Virginia Woolf and it's from To the Lighthouse. Full disclosure, I've not read To the Lighthouse, so I'm putting it on my list as well as putting it on yours. But this month we are talking about the theme of tradition and the things that we inherit from people. And yeah, I thought this quote gave exactly into that. And To the Lighthouse is widely considered to be one of Woolf's masterpieces and a cornerstone of modern literature. And it's set in a small group of Scottish islands, and it follows the Ramsay family and their guests over the course of many years. And there are three main parts in the novel. Again, I have not read this. This is just from my little research. There's the window, time passes, the lighthouse. And the major themes that this book talks about are time and impermanence, how life is fleeting, things are always moving, memory and subjectivity, how we sometimes put things in some rose-colored glasses when we look back on them, art and legacy, and then family and gender dynamics. So if we're talking about Virginia Woolf, I want to give you some fun facts on the girl. So she coined the term stream of consciousness in literary criticism. So she didn't invent the technique as a whole, but her explorations helped popularize it in English literature. And stream of consciousness is, in case you don't know, it's pretty self-explanatory, but in case you haven't heard that term before, it's basically the idea that this novel is going through the same way that our brain thinks. Because traditionally, there are certain ways you ought to do things. There are certain ways to write a paragraph. There are certain ways to tell a story. But if it's stream of consciousness, it's more so just coming out. It's less filtered. So Virginia Woolf, this is pretty well known. She did suffer from mental illness most of her life. She had a lot of severe depression episodes and psychotic episodes. And she did commit suicide in 1941. Obviously, she's a pioneer of feminist literature. Her essay, A Room of One's Own, from 1929, it argued that women need financial independence and personal space to create art. And you know what I saw? I think it was last week. Obviously, this is going to be a different week than when this is coming out. But when I'm recording this, we just hit 50 years since a woman could have a credit card. I saw that on a TikTok with an edit of Little Women behind it. I don't know why. But my day job is in financial well-being. I'm in the financial well-being space. And the 50 years thing, jarring to say the least. It's kind of like when you think about the fact that the same year the Eiffel Tower was built was when Nintendo was founded, or there are a bunch of other weird facts like that I found. Like Marilyn Monroe and Queen Elizabeth were born in the same year. Isn't that insane? And the woolly mammoths were still alive while the Egyptians were building the pyramids. What? In my mind, that doesn't make sense. Ice Age? Come on. And Oxford University existed for hundreds of years before the Aztec Empire was founded. Oxford, I've been there, I studied there. You know, crazy. I think it can be hard to wrap my mind around the fact that less than a lifetime ago, women couldn't have access to credit cards. Even like, well, my mom was alive. My mom was alive when that change was made, only a few years old. But it's crazy to think about just 50 years ago, women couldn't have their own credit card. What? That's crazy. That's crazy. I can't imagine. It was a different time, sure, but I can't imagine how confined, I guess is the word, I would feel, how dependent I would feel on somebody else if I didn't have my own credit card. I'm quite independent, probably to a fault. I love the fact that I live on my own and I pay for my rent and I do all of these things. I can't imagine living in a time where that's not the case. Okay, next up, she and her husband founded the Hogarth Press. It printed works by T.S. Eliot, Sigmund Freud, and herself, of course. Virginia Woolf was super into math and logic, super exciting. She studied at home with her father, Sir Leslie Stephen, and enjoyed puzzles, pattern, logical thinkings that influenced her writing structure. That's interesting. I love math. I'll tell anybody that my favorite subject in school was math. I love an equation. I love knowing that things are going to work exactly right if I know the rules. And sometimes I think that's why I like writing. And that's why I loved learning Spanish. It was really easy for me. I'm not as good at it now as I should be, but I loved that class. I went all the way up in school and I went like ahead of my year. And I think it's because there's a science to it. There's an explanation. There's a pattern. With writing, it's the same. Virginia Woolf experimented heavily with narrative time. There's a time passes section in To the Lighthouse, what we're pulling quotes from today, and that really influenced how we write nowadays. And her family in general is deeply intellectual and artistic. She was a part of the Bloomsbury group, a circle of writers, artists, and thinkers that included a bunch of famous people. And she was connected to a lot of artists. And yeah, so some other quotes from To the Lighthouse are, what is the meaning of life? That was all. A simple question, one that tended to close in on one with years. The great revelation had never come. The great revelation perhaps never did come. Instead, there were little daily miracles, illuminations, matches struck unexpectedly in the dark. Here was one. Another quote, friendships, even the best of them, are frail things. One drifts apart. That's a bad quote. Not bad as in actually bad quality-wise. It's a really good quote, but it makes me feel sad inside. I do think that's sadly true, and I'm not going to say any more on that matter. And then lastly, beauty was not everything. Beauty had this penalty. It came too readily, it came too completely. It stilled life, froze it. So that is Virginia Woolf and To the Lighthouse. I'll read you our quote of the day one more time because I've been yapping. And all the lives we ever lived and all the lives to be are full of trees and changing leaves. Beautiful, Virginia. Thank you so much. Okay, the first book I want to talk about is a book I'm actually in the middle of listening to, an audiobook. I am filming this right after Thanksgiving and I drove to my parents' house in South Carolina and I listened to an audiobook on my way. So I've not yet finished this, so there will be no spoilers because I actually don't know how it ends, but I am 6 hours into it. And this is God of the Woods. It's by Liz Moore. And there are a lot of plot lines going on, to be honest with you. It's hard to create a summary, but basically the concept is there's this summer camp. And this summer camp, it's like an outdoorsy summer camp. You send your kids away, they live there all summer, they learn how to do outdoorsy things like make a fire and survive. But there's a lot of history going on and we see all these different worlds unravel. We learn about the family who owns the camp. We learn about the family who has been the camp managers. They don't own it, but they're the people who have been running the camp. And we learn about the people who go to the camp, and there's flashbacks and flash forwards, kind of like To the Lighthouse with our time change. And I think the narration is exquisitely done of revealing who's connected to who and how. But basically what you come to find out is once upon a time on these grounds, a boy went missing. Something bad happened. And that's all I'll say. That's all I'll say. I don't want to spoil anything. So the main quote that I wanted to share that aligns with our theme of tradition and getting things passed down is the Van Laar children grew up carrying the weight of old expectations, secrets, and privileges, patterns that seemed as permanent as the forest surrounding them. I think this talks about tradition in a not necessarily positive connotation, which is something that is real, right? There are some things that we get passed down that we don't necessarily want passed down. And it talks about that. So that's why I thought it aligned with today. This is what the internet says. The novel begins in August 1975 at a summer camp deep in the mountains called Camp Emerson. And one morning, a counselor discovers that a young girl is missing. And that's basically all you know. And the main themes that we navigate are class and privilege. They're the people who own the camp, and then they're the people who attend the camp, and then they're the people who work at the camp. All very different things. All very different things. We also talk about memory loss and generational trauma, how you inherit these terrible things that have happened and how you either don't talk about them or how you do talk about them or how it makes you view the world. Also talks about power, secrecy, social dynamics, nature and the wilderness as a metaphor, who's really in charge, and then identity, escape, and freedom. Like To the Lighthouse, this has a multi-timeline structure, so I thought that was interesting and it paralleled. There are a lot of characters in this book, but I think the author does such a good job of wielding them and using them to build the narrative. I think if you're a writer, it's an excellent read. Super well written, super believable. And the funny thing was, I was driving, and sadly now all of my friends have jobs, which is a terrible, terrible part of your life to be in. When my parents first moved to South Carolina, a lot of my friends were working odd jobs because I went to art school. And so most of the time I could call around to my friend group and somebody somewhere would not be working and would be able to talk to me for 2 hours while I drove to South Carolina. However, sadly, times have changed and we're all old now. So I was calling around, nobody was picking up, everyone was sending me to voicemail. So I was like, oh my gosh, so I guess I'm gonna download an audiobook. So I have some credits on Audible and I just clicked one of the first ones that looked interesting because I'm driving at a fast pace. And it started playing, and I selected God of the Woods. And when I got to my mom's house, my mom had already read it. She had actually bought the book, and then she'd also listened to it on audiobook. So she's so funny. But it was just silly that I had just started it, and she had already read it. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, I think it's really worth a read. I can't wait to finish it. I love long drives, something you should know about me. I love the time to think about things, you know. So anyway, if you're looking for another audiobook to listen to, this is there for you, book to read. And this, again, is called God of the Woods. It's by Liz Moore. Okay, the next thing we are going to talk about today is Minx. This is a TV show I recently watched season 1. Full disclosure, I only watched this show because the actor who played Nick Miller on New Girl was in it, and I love him. So that's why I picked up the show, just so you know. What it's about this writer girl who has this idea for a feminist magazine, kind of like Virginia Woolf was our feminist girl of the day, but nobody's gonna publish her because it's set in the 1970s. And she runs into this guy, this is non-spoilers, this guy is Nick Miller, not really Nick Miller, but you know what I mean. And he's a publisher and he says he'll help her out, but it turns out he publishes adult magazines. So adult content warning, there is a lot of nudity. I will tell you, I skipped those parts because I don't particularly love it. Doesn't really do much for me. So content warning that wise, you're gonna see some naked bodies. You can skip those parts if you want. Wanted to talk about this today because I think the show touches a lot on tradition. And at that time in the 70s, tradition was, oh, girl magazines look like this and boy magazines look like this. And this is what the general reader wants to read and what you're doing doesn't fit. So we're not gonna publish you. And she basically resorted to her own means to figure it out. I finished season 1 of the show. I tried to start season 2. I wasn't loving the first episode, so I turned it off. I don't know if you'll get that far. I've heard mixed reviews, but I thought it was nice to have on in the background. I love the 70s aesthetic, and so the women's clothes are just fantastic, which that, like Marvelous Miss Maisel, I did like that show, but I would have watched it just for the clothes. So if you want to see some cute clothes, there's also that. It's a comedy, it's fun, it's light, might be good to have on in the background. And I think it talks a lot about these traditions that we're handed. And sometimes when you're handed something that's been done forever and ever, you have to figure out for yourself, is this a good thing that I should continue doing or should I break this tradition on purpose? And we got all of them in the world. There are plenty of bad things that we ought not to be doing that generations and generations of people have done. And there are plenty of things that are really beautiful that we do and they bring us closer to humanity like we talked about last week. So Minx is my other TV show rec for you. And then what I wanted to end on today is a play. We haven't talked about a play in a while. I was trying to figure out, I was like, what else can I talk about today? And it kind of aligns with our God of the Woods, the book that we talked about. This play is called God of Carnage, to God of in the titles. This play is by Yasmina Reza, and it came out in 2006. And when I was in college, one of the directors I really, really liked, who was like a student like me, just a little bit older, they put on this play. And two of them, two friends who I don't think are friends anymore, but that's beside the point. They put on this play, God of Carnage, and basically what it's about is these two parents of young children who are having dinner. It's these two couples, one couple, another couple of young children who are having dinner. And their young children on the playground got into a fight, and it's the parents trying to have dinner so they can be cordial about what happened to their children and sort everything out, right? And the whole concept is that they're trying to be civilized because their children weren't civilized. And as you can imagine, the play evolves into them not being so civilized, and it gets a little violent and it gets a little crazy, and it's really fun. If you have a chance to see it, I would. If you could direct it, even better. I feel like it'd be so fun to act in. I love to be crazy on stage. I've talked about this before, but this play talks a lot about tradition, right? How things are meant to be. And hey, our kids are not meant to fight. They should not be doing that. How do we fix that? Oh, we're adults. We should have dinner together as two couples. Set this aside. We need to figure this out. It's these traditions, and then breaking that tradition, and then breaking the societal norms of not being violent with one another and making things violent. Really good. I think it's really well written. It's so exciting to watch, but also uncomfortable to watch because you're like, oh my God, this, you know? Some notable quotes for you that I have. We're civilized, aren't we? That's what matters, civilization. And again, that's trying to get you back to the tradition of it, back to the etiquette of being together. And then next up, you see, the problem is you think you can behave with decency and you can't. And that kind of talks about the inherited societal expectations that we have, and then the instinctive human behavior that contradicts it. The world is rotten. It's made of rot and lies, and we try to hide it with our little manners. I love that. I think it's so funny. Next up, it's amazing how quickly civility disappears when you scratch the surface. Then lastly, we try to be good. We try to be decent, but in the end, we're animals. Oh my gosh. It's such a good play. I'm just thinking about it now. I know you can't see the memories that are in my head, but they did a wonderful job with it. And that's God of Carnage. And just imagine, you know, there are scenarios in your own life, I hope, that I'm not just crazy, but there are times where you would really like to do something insane. Like maybe you were sitting at Thanksgiving dinner in November and you just wanted to pour that whole boat of gravy in your mouth. Or maybe you wanted to throw a roll at your cousin. I don't know your life story, but I know there have been times in my life where I'll be sitting somewhere and I'll wish that I could just stand up and dance on the table. And hey, you can do that. Actually, sometimes you probably ought to do those things that you want to. We're just a little scared. But a lot of times we refrain for a reason. But I think this play does a good job of experimenting with what it would be like if we did those things that we always imagined in our head that we've learned to suppress, whether they be good or bad. In this case, mostly bad. Okay, I wanted to close on this story. So I had a fat crush. This is kind of stemming from the summer camp God of the Woods that we were talking about. I had a fat crush on this boy, Ian, at summer camp. For a few years, I would do this adventure camp is what we called it. I don't know if it had another name. Basically, every day you'd post up in your workout clothes and you go and you do something epic. You would rock climb, you would go sailing, you would go caving. You did so many cool things. I loved this camp. And I went with my family friends. There was one girl my age and a boy. And the girl my age, we were tight. We still are tight. But the boy, obviously, we were friends, but we weren't as close. So he brought a friend, and his friend's name was Ian. And I had the fattest crush on this boy, Ian. Oh my good golly. I don't know why. You know, you're hormonal. You're put in proximity to somebody new. Boom, there's a crush. And I do feel like a summer camp crush is kind of a rite of passage. It's kind of like a tradition that we're handed down over years. And God of the Woods talks about summer camp crushes and all that romantic sort of thing that's going on. But I had a fat crush on this guy. And at the time, my mom had gotten me A Sentence a Day. It was a book that you can keep for 5 years. I didn't do all 5 years. I wish I would have. Again, I'm saying this like I did last week. I should be journaling more. But I have some of those from that time period, and I would just write little things about him. I was so obsessed. Like we were caving and he went up out of the cave before me, and then I was getting up, and I'm much more athletic now, to be honest with you, than I was then. I was a really unathletic child, and he like pulled me out of the cave. And then when we were sailing and we would like toss the ball in the water and you'd figure out how to sail to go get the ball, him and I would like toss it back and forth. I don't know. I think I was on Accutane at the time, or something was going on that I had to wear a special sunscreen, and it smelled so wonderful. And now even when I smell that sunscreen, it makes me think of that camp. But I had this fat crush on this kid, Ian, and then he disappeared. I never saw him again. And I think that was before our era of Instagram, because I don't follow him on anything now. I don't even know his last name now. I haven't thought about Ian in years until I was mapping out what I was going to say on this episode. But that's cool. I think that's a wonderful part of life that I hope everyone else gets to enjoy. I hope everyone else has this random summertime crush that they don't talk to ever again. You know, it's a wonderful thing. And I get kind of gooey, as you are well aware if you're listening to me talk. I think the shared experiences, that sounds hippy dippy, but I think the things that happen in your life that have happened to so many other people are so beautiful. I love the fact that when I tell my friends this crazy story about something that happened to me on a date, half of them will be like, oh my gosh, that's happened to me before. I love that when I would tell my grandmother that I had this guy at school who wouldn't stop picking on me, she would tell me that she had a guy at school just like that. I love how similar all of our lives are, yet so different, because that makes me feel more human. It's like the tradition of life, these little things, these rites of passage. It means you really are here and you really are the thing. You really are a human. You really are alive. But I may be wrong. My name's Caroline May Whitson. Thanks for hanging out with me. Let's do it again soon. Bye.